owns the Kennewick Man? Through dating and prehistoric evidence, archaeologists generally agree that Native Americans were the first Americans. Because of this, they should own the rights to the Kennewick Man. Not only was the Kennewick Man their oldest ancestor, but it was a symbol of respect for the Indians, since they suffered so greatly for so long due to lack of respect and understanding for their culture. In order to explain just how important the Kennewick Man were for the natives, let's take a look back into the history of the Indians. When the Europeans made contact with the Indians, they viewed them as animalistic. They lived in huts, they hunted like savages, and they even made weapons from stone. But ignoring how skilled these group of people were, they deemed them as uncivilized and an inferior race. So why were these group of people so different than anything they've ever seen? Scientist Samuel George Norton was determined to find out. Through his research, he determined that skull size was correlated with race and various levels of intelligence. Norton began collecting skulls, hundreds, and by the end of his research, he'd collect 1,000 skulls, mostly those of Indians. Indian villages of men, women, and children were slaughtered for their skulls. Morton's research suggested that the Indians' brains were so deficient, it was impossible to civilize the race, and they could not live alongside them. Lieutenant Richard Henry Pratt set out to prove the Indians were capable of becoming civilized. All that he had to do was kill the Indian and save the man. Indians were taken from their villages as prisoners. On arrival, their hairs were cut and they were dressed in U.S. Army uniforms. This was stripping them of their culture and killing the Indian. The experiment had begun. After a year of living in harsh conditions, the Indians that survived were sent to school. At the end of the experiment, some resigned to the European way of life, but many went back home. Pratt decided he'd try again, but with a younger generation, and this time he had greater success. When school was over, the Indians still had no place in the European society. With no place in society in either worlds, many turned to war or committed suicide. Pratt could not kill the Indian and save the man. The Indian was still an Indian, and would always be viewed as an inferior, savage race. With no place in either worlds, the Indians turned to war or they committed suicide. Forced assimilation would prove to always be fatal for the natives. After years at war and loss of money, the U.S. government decided to cut the Indians loose. They no longer wanted to be burdened with the reservation camps. They wanted the Indians to live as civilized Americans. The Dawes Act was passed. The Indians were expected to live as farmers, own their own businesses, and participate in government. The act failed the Indians terribly. Many died or became homeless and poor. In another attempt to force the Indians into the American ways, the tribal termination policy was put into effect in 1953. Like the Dawes Act, the Indians were forced to leave the reservations and make a living for themselves in a civilized manner, but this too failed the Indians. Forced out of the reservations, the Indians became poor and homeless overnight, and many died due to illness. When the Kennewick Man's remains were found, archaeologist James Childers collected the bones and began to take a series of measurements of the skull and long bones in his lab. He presumed the remains were Caucasoid. However, details of the skeleton like a stone spear point in the hip, badly worn teeth typical of an ancient Indian population, and lack of cavities which also suggested Native American origins. When news of the findings spread, Army Corporation of Engineer announced they were going to take the remains and hand them over to the Five Alliances of the Northwest Tribe. Umatilla leader Ahmed Minthorn stated that the scientific probing and destruction of the Kennewick Man was disrespectful, sacrilegious, and illegal. The measuring of the Kennewick Man's remains mimicked the way in which Morton measured the skulls of the Indians he brutalized. For the natives, this is an unhealed wound. As the first Americans and rightful owners of the Kennewick Man, they demanded for him the respect that many after